The art of fiction can often be thought of as a math equation that has to be solved. Foreshadowing plus symbolism equals good story, or something silly you might see like that on Twitter. This is a reductive viewpoint on fiction, and it's really not something so simple. An analogy I've heard that I'm quite fond of is that literature or anime or art or whatever you want to call it is more similar to a Lego set. The narrative gives you the blocks that you can use to construct something, whatever you desire really, as long as the pieces are there for you to use. One of those pieces that I find to be extremely undervalued are visuals. Obviously, anime is a visual medium, and I find it unfortunate amount of times that it doesn't really make great use of that advantage. To use visual storytelling to its advantage to portray ideas, or weigh in on subjects for better or for worse, and to do so many other things. And going based off of some of the streams I've done, a lot of people are unfamiliar with the power of this tool. When people think of visual storytelling, they might think of show, don't tell. Probably one of the most popular online criticisms of media in the past decade. What it usually refers to is, rather than exposition dumping things, have the reader experience it through actions, subtext, senses, or feelings. I disagree with the rampant use of this criticism, as I believe it is important to know how to use both. Not every single little detail needs to be physically shown to the viewer. You might end up misusing a lot of runtime with that. Showing, however, is especially useful in, obviously, these visual formats, and can be used to demonstrate a massive amount about particular scenes. There are a few series I want to use as an example of visual storytelling. Zom 100, which we will use as a method to convey ideas about characters and their arcs through visuals alone. My Hero Academia, which we will use as a way to demonstrate how authors can weigh in on particular topics by using lighting or shading and things like that. And finally, Mushoku Tensei, which we will use to demonstrate how visual portrayal can end up bolstering some pretty bad content. I know this last one is controversial, so just try and hear me out, alright? Let's start with Zom 100. The series is about Akira, a guy who works for a corporation that is the definition of exploitative. He completely gives up agency in his own life, wandering through life for multiple years as a zombie. Rather than making the plunge to actually quit his job and move on, he hopes that something entirely out of his control comes to take his life, struggling to even make the decision to end it himself. That is, until the zombie apocalypse takes over. The collapse of the status quo lets him recognize that he doesn't have to go to work, and this is where our first piece of visual storytelling comes into play. It can be apparent enough that Akira is pretty happy about this newfound development. I mean, look at him. However, the anime takes it one step further. Throughout his time at his exploitative company, the color is literally drained out of the first episode, right before the apocalypse becoming almost entirely black and white, alongside also being inside letterboxing. As he escapes the horde of zombies chasing him, watching a plane crash overhead, it all sets in. This is not just an isolated incident, this is the collapse of a civilization. Starting today, he doesn't have to go to work anymore. He rips off his badge, and as he destroys the letterboxing, the color of the anime suddenly comes back, just as he feels he has regained his life. It's not a necessary element, and Akira even explicitly states this after the fact, but it's a moment that helps sell the feelings of this episode, and I think it's a really great thing to achieve through color alone. A couple episodes after this, Akira finds himself reunited with an old friend of his from before he lived only to work. They had had an argument in the past due to Kenichiro showing off the best bits of his life as Akira was crushed under the gears of an exploitative company. Kenichiro says, "Just quit, forehead," and they end up clashing due to Kenichiro's status in life. After meeting up again, they rush to a rooftop, followed by a horde of zombies that could come crashing through the door any second now. Their only option is to jump off the roof of this building onto another. The show here uses lighting to show a really interesting thing about these characters and their relationship. Akira spearheads the idea of leaping across, standing directly in the light. This discussion about taking a leap isn't only reality, it's also a metaphorical conversation. Akira stands in the light because he has already openly apologized to Kensho earlier and laid himself bare, serving as a guide for what Kensho should do. Not only that, but Akira had already made the mental leap to quit his job and do what he truly desires rather than be held down by the machinations of an exploitative company. Kensho stands back, shrouded in darkness. He has not yet been fully honest with Akira about his circumstances and is still too hesitant to take the leap to do what he truly desires. Chasing the back of the leaping Akira, Kensho slowly comes into the light, seeing just how liberated he has become. After Akira lands, Kensho retreats back into the shadows, admitting that he never enjoyed his job either. Everything he did and showed off never truly made him happy, bragging to hide what he lacked. As he accepts this, and as the truth finally comes out to him, so too does the sun come out from behind the clouds. He admits he wants to truly make people happy and be a stand-up comedian, and the rooftop he stands in slowly becomes illuminated by the sunlight. Akira tells him to do it, to make that leap and do what he truly desires, and so, he literally leaps. The color returning to his life, the letterboxing being destroyed, and the light or darkness of Akira and Kensho's relationships are all things that aren't necessarily needed at all, but the story uses these visuals to enhance the feelings of emotion, giving the viewer more blocks to work with when constructing interpretations, as I just did here. This sort of visual analysis can also be used to determine, oh, I don't know, if a manga author likes child abuse? Okay, yeah, kind of a weird thing to throw out there, but let's talk about My Hero Academia's Endeavor. He is a character that is introduced pretty early into the series, and yeah, he's fucking evil. He beats his kids, he abuses his wife. He was a pretty bad dude, and the problem for some people arises when he begins to get an atonement arc. Now, if you have a personal problem with abusers atoning, or how the Endeavor one is handled in particular, I won't really comment on that because that is obviously a deeply personal experience that I obviously can't comment on a YouTube video. The most I can say is that for the most part, I think it's executed well. Where I believe a lot of people falter is when they call the author an abuse apologist by virtue of making Endeavor not a one-dimensional scumbag. Some spaces of the community believe that My Hero Academia is implicitly endorsing his actions, and I believe that there is a pretty easy way to disprove that. Let's examine how Endeavor is portrayed during some of the Todoroki family backstory. There are multiple shots here in particular that I think warrant some discussion. You can say a lot about a particular subject without having to explicitly state it, especially when it comes to visuals. These are scenes that happened much further after the Atonement arc started, despite a common criticism being that Endeavor's abusive nature was retconned. You'll notice that as Endeavor speaks here, he is drawn more shaded than his wife, almost ominously, and with significantly thicker line art. Through lighting, line work, and even as something just as simple as facial expressions, you can tell that Endeavor is not being portrayed in a positive light. Throughout these scenes, Endeavor's face becomes more and more shaded and hidden from light, and the people around him look more and more miserable. At the end of the following chapter, his wife is on the ground, leading us to believe that she has just been struck, and Endeavor is not only completely shaded in black at this point, but he looks genuinely monstrous, and the kids feel forced to cower in fear and cover their ears. Now, looking at this, do you think that in some way that this is glorifying Endeavor's past or erasing his misdeeds? I would like to think that most of you would disagree with that notion, and I think believing so is doing a disservice to the pretty explicit visual imagery going on here. Some people have this idea that if the story doesn't outright say it, then it doesn't happen, which can be true for some things, but when it comes to how a story feels about a particular subject matter or how certain characters feel and act, that couldn't be further from the truth. Now let's take a look at another example about Endeavor that I think My Hero Academia actually didn't do so great on. During the villain hunt arc, after the abuse that Endeavor had put his family through goes public, protesters begin to throw stuff at him. They are generally upset about the status quo at large, but also largely point blame at Endeavor, calling him a coward and attacking him about the victims of Dabi, the son he neglected until he essentially killed himself, who then popped back up as a villain. Now, let's take a look at the previous portrayal of Endeavor being an absolute freak piece of shit, and then slowly overlay the portrayal of the protesters who don't like a guy who beat his family and caused his kid to commit suicide. This is what I mean by a series inadvertently endorsing some kind of bad ideas through visuals, using the exact same visual motif that was used to denounce Endeavor's awful behavior to denounce protesters who don't like a guy for beating his kids. Whether intentional or not, we're led to believe that the author thinks that they are the bad guys for being distrusting of him, and this is also something reinforced by the story never really having anybody alongside him or close to him criticize him for his past actions because, oh, well, he's a good guy now. While I think My Hero Academia has its hiccups with visual storytelling like this, I do think it overall does a pretty good job though. An example of something I find to be really, really fucking bad, and bear in mind this anime is definitely not alone in this, is Mushoku Tensei, specifically episode 4. To quickly summarize, Rudy, the protagonist of the series, is reincarnated into a new world and given the opportunity to re-experience life after being a shut-in. He still has the mind of his 30 or 40-year-old self back from Japan, allowing him to tackle this newfound childhood with a much different perspective. The issue for me arises when he's talking about the actual, real child friend he made and goes, man, I should stay in this village and, raise her to be my ideal woman. Now, of course, having really fucked up subject matter in fiction is fine, depending on how it's handled, and what follows this comment of Rudy talking about grooming an actual child is a gag of him rolling around in his bed calling her name so that his dad can walk in for the sake of another gag. Whatever your opinion on Mushoku Tensei is, and whatever the author's intention here was, it's very clear to see why some people would be very skeptical or even uncomfortable with the prospect of a man mentally 30 plus years in age talking about raising a child bride to be his ideal woman, and have it be portrayed as haha, funny, grooming is hilarious. If someone came out the other end not liking the series, I think that would be a fair interpretation with some of the pieces that you were offered to build your construction with. In the same vein that, if someone felt put off by My Hero Academia portraying the protesters in a similar way to Endeavor himself, that would be fair. A lot of people's response to my criticism of this Mushoku Tensei scene is, oh, well, what is he supposed to do? Go to jail? And, no. As mentioned previously, and the point of this video, you can show a character doing bad things and denounce them visually. An example I like to bring up is ReZero, who portrayed its protagonist having a crybaby incel meltdown extremely negatively, not just from his insane dialogue, but also by drawing him looking like he's absolutely unhinged. The series doesn't explicitly come out and say, Subaru did something wrong, because it doesn't have to, because it shows you through the visual medium. Because at the end of the day, anime is a visual medium, and the things that happen literally on screen are just as important as the spoken word of these characters themselves. I encourage you all, next time you watch something, take a closer look as to what is literally happening on screen, and you might just find a bit more to appreciate about it. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the funny YouTube algorithm. You can check the description down below to follow me on Twitter, where I'm objectively correct all the time. You can also join my Discord, where we talk about My Hero Academia, ReZero, Jujutsu Kaisen, and stuff like that. And you can also now become a YouTube member, which basically just gives you access to behind-the-scenes content, a little badge on comments, and live stream chats, and access to some emotes. Only do so if you want to support the channel, though. But that's about it, though. Thank you for watching. See ya.